Miliski, thank you so much for joining. I want to start off by asking you, recently we heard Mr. Jagmeet saying that we need to call the Sikh riots that happened in 1984 and the people who died, we need to call that a genocide. And then on Sunday we saw Prime Minister Trudeau go to a place where they were celebrating supposedly a cultural festival, where Saki is a festival that they were celebrating, and there were Khalistani slogans that were shouted, and he seemed very happy about it, and he seemed to smile and all of that. I just want to get a sense from you. What do you have to say about all of this, and why now?
I think it's an extension of, well, it's the old adage: if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And what I mean is that, I've been covering this particular aspect of the Khalistan movement, particularly in Canada, for 20 years now, since they first started by putting small 8x10 posters on the parade floats at Vaisakhi parades, showing important Sikh Khalistani martyrs and assassins. And they got away with that. So they thought, let's try bigger posters. So then they started to put big posters on the sides of the floats. And they got away with that. Then they put a life-size glamour photo of Talvinder Singh Parmar, the Air India bomber, and therefore the greatest mass murderer in Canadian history, on the side of an important Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. And they got away with that. They got away with it even after we started at the CBC. We did some reporting on this and started asking politicians, of all parties, who went and attended and sort of looked the other way and acted like they didn't know about Parmar, they didn't know the background to it, and they were after votes, and they didn't want to emphasize anything negative. And so did the politicians at the provincial level, the state level, as you would call it, and it started to become embarrassing. But up until now, it hasn't been embarrassing enough for any one party to call out any other party for, as it were, playing footsie with the Khalistanis, because they all do it. It's as simple as that, in my view. That is, I can't criticize you for doing it because I'm doing the same thing, and the same applies to you and to him and to her. They're all doing it. So that's why they all get away with it. And it's important to them because, of course, we're talking in the context of Canadian politics, where many, if not most, Canadian federal elections turn on a small number of ridings, as we call them, swing ridings, meaning that they are held precariously by one party, but they often switch back and forth to the other party, or yet a third party. And so if you don't play ball and you don't show up for the Vaisakhi parade or the Khalsa Day speeches, as happened just a couple of days ago now here in Ontario, then you risk losing the seat. Mm-hmm. And if you lose 5 or 6 seats in Brampton, in Surrey, for example, then that can turn a Canadian election. So that's the fundamental dynamic. You can call it vote bank politics, if you will. And as I say, until voters exact a price, or somebody comes along and takes a risk and embarrasses the Khalistanis and their opponents and says, you know what? This guy was a mass murderer, and you're not going to have me come to your Vaisakhi parade and stand under that poster and smile and wave like there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not coming to your parade. Now, if there were a politician, I put it to you, who did say that, who stood up and made that unprecedented speech in Canadian politics, I think you would find a very interesting result, because there's a whole lot of Sikhs in Canada and a whole lot of Hindus and many others. There's a couple of million people of Indian descent in Canada. You might find that you might win after all. You might win that seat, only just by soliciting different votes from the majority rather than from a motivated minority. Sorry for the long explanation, but I think you're with me now.
So I said, what I was saying was that you've been following this for many, many years now, and we've seen when the bombing happened, the people who died in that airplane bombing were Canadians. Like you said, that was the worst history, of terror. It's the worst case of terrorism in Canada. But that time, there were always been. There weren't so many Sikh extremists then, were they, that they actually could impact, because we've seen a pattern, whether it's with Justin Trudeau or his father, they have been constantly quoting Khalistanis and the Khalistani movement somewhere or the other. I mean, I'm trying to understand and wrap my head around is how has this been happening and allowed to grow? Because they came in small numbers and they've always been in small numbers. And you rightly pointed out that majority of Sikhs and Hindus are not, asking for a separate state. So how and when did they get that much of space, and why were they given the space is my question.
Well, the first thing, and many Indians don't understand or accept what I'm going to say now, but I'm telling you whether you like it or not, I guess. And that is that both Mr. Trudeau, the present Prime Minister, his father, Pierre Trudeau, who you rightly mentioned in this context because he locked horns, as it were, with Indira Gandhi back in the day over this issue. Many Indians don't get that in Canada, the United States, Britain, Australia, a lot of other places, free speech laws are taken seriously. It's not something that, India complains that you're allowing people to say things we don't like, and we're going to roll over and lock them up. We don't lock people up for saying Palestine Zindabad. And I would personally, as a long-standing critic for going on a quarter of a century now, the Khalistan movement in Canada and everywhere else, I would say that I support that freedom of speech. I would say let them vote in their referendum. Let them advocate as much as they wish. But we must stop short of violence. That's the problem. So once they started crossing that line, then of course they should be shut down. And that's the problem, that Canada and to a degree elsewhere as well, but we'll talk about Canada, has not figured out how to draw that line and say, okay, I support your right to speak, but I don't support your right to advocate terrorism by showing these pictures of martyrs and telling kids that assassinating Indira Gandhi was a great thing. And look, we splashed a little extra red paint on her sari in the tableau celebrating her assassination that is parading through downtown Brampton, Ontario, which is what happened, as you know, last year. Again, you give them an inch, they take a mile. True. So that drawing that line is the key, and we haven't drawn it.
I agree with you in terms of freedom of speech. I believe that if there are people who have gone there and they want to protest, they should be allowed to protest. But here we are talking about beyond protest. I mean, the bombing happened. The Canadians did lose their lives, and the people who were found guilty, who were very, seen practicing how to make a bomb there are so many loopholes. Yes. Starting then. That has crossed the line. I mean, which is, again, my question is two parts. One, bombing happened way back, and these people were involved. That's one. And secondly, how, in terms of free speech, there has to be a line. Like you said, if there is advocating violence in India is, again, not considered free speech. You can be, you can speak freely, but you can't I can't stand up and say, I want to kill somebody, So yes. I want to understand, what is the line that you draw? But in my mind, the line was drawn when you lost 300 people who were your citizens and who were innocent, yes, coming home for holidays.
Of course. And then, not only did we fail to draw that line, but there was a second failure, which is little understood even in Canada, and that is the failure of the legal system. That it was just Canada wasn't used to this kind of thing. We didn't know what to do about terrorism. We didn't understand how terrorists operate, and the legal system let him off the hook by saying, "Oh well, that doesn't prove that he did it, and that doesn't prove that he did it." Taken together, all these 50 important pieces of evidence do prove that he's innocent, but the legal system was simply not sophisticated and muscular enough to win the prosecutions, except in one case, that is the bomb maker Inderjit Rayat, who, as you know, went to jail for almost 30 years. He served 29 years in prison. So people often say, well, nobody was convicted. Well, he was convicted, and he was the one who, as you rightly point out, went into the woods under surveillance by Canadian intelligence officers to do a test bombing 3 weeks before the real thing back in 1985. Now, the failure to draw the line on freedom of speech. You say, for example, that in India, it's not freedom of speech to advocate violence. Well, it's the same in Canada. It's not considered freedom of speech to go and advocate violence, but the problem is that it's not recognized in Canada as being the advocation of violence if you put up a poster and teach kids that the worst mass murderer in Canadian history is a big hero, a saint almost. That's we don't get it. I mean, why is that allowed? It's allowed because, well, they allow it and they allow it and they get elected, and I want to get elected too.
Oh, then I mean, again, I keep thinking about the fact that even in the current scenario, we've seen how India was accused of killing of Nijjar. As Prime Minister Trudeau said, he had alleged evidence, that there was. I mean, I'm trying. It's been 1 year almost, and nothing has come out of that. And there also have been enough stories in the paper which talked about how he was fighting. There were these wars that have started, gang wars are happening. There are groups of within the extremist people who are sort of killing each others and stuff, like gang wars are happening. Now, again, this is again crossing that line, and there is the violence involved in that. To drag another country without credible evidence, how are you looking at all of this? Because here we're talking about at the top level, very top level, which normally one doesn't see all of this happening.
Yeah, this is a very difficult and complicated case, and I think that Indians are in for a shock. In fact, I know they are. And what I mean by that is that you're right, Trudeau did make these allegations, what he said were credible allegations of a potential link between an Indian government official and the murder of Hardeepsinghnijjar in Surrey, British Columbia on June the 18th of last year. And he didn't provide persuasive evidence, or any evidence at all, at least in public. Yeah. Well, it's classified, don't want to prejudice the investigation. So it didn't look very good, did it? And India rather won that first round. You accuse us, you don't produce evidence, we kick out your diplomats, relations go into a deep freeze. Trudeau has failed. Problem. He didn't fail because the Americans threw him a lifeline by producing a detailed indictment full of facts, which suggests very strongly that the plot that Trudeau described was very real, number one. And number two, there was abundant hard evidence for it. And number three, it's the same plot. There is a sense in India, I've spoken to quite a few Indians in the last 24 hours after the Khalsa Day appearance and the Khalistan Zindabad chants. And they seem to be under the impression, which is mistaken, that, oh, well, that's a separate matter. There's the Canadian allegations about Nijjar, and there's the US allegations about a plot to kill Panoon. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's best to read the indictment before you pretend that these are two different things, because they're not. In the indictment, you see the person being accused, Nick Gupta, who was allegedly hiring the hitman to kill Gurpatwant Singh Panoon of Sikhs for Justice. He is saying in that indictment to somebody else in the plot that Nijjar was another target of his plot, the same plot. So up to now, I've put it to you that India has kind of won the first round because of the lack of evidence produced by Trudeau. That excuse is no longer available, I'm afraid, because there is abundant evidence that it's the same plot as the Americans are alleging. And as of yesterday morning, the Washington Post published further details naming the officials in New Delhi that are alleged to be involved. I'm not going to throw their names around here. This is reporting. It's not all proven, but I don't see angry denials anymore. Remember that when Trudeau made his charges, the first reaction from the Indians was, it's absurd, unsubstantiated. And then that went away in a flash when the Americans produced, here's a thick file of evidence. Now what do you say? And suddenly they did a 180. It was a complete Indian flip-flop when they said, oh, now it's not absurd anymore. We're going to take it very seriously. We're going to have a high-level committee investigate. And this high-level committee has already reported back to the Americans to say, well, this was unauthorized rogue operatives. We didn't know anything about it. Well, of course, that's what they're going to say. That's how it's probably going to be resolved. But there's going to be a tussle now between the US in particular and India to decide, well, how are we going to agree to deal with this in such a way that the real top echelon is not implicated, but nevertheless, there is accountability and there is justice seen to be done, not swept under the rug, so that this never happens again. That's how I see that whole unfolding story.
Right. So in India, how people are looking at and what the discussions that are happening around the Panun case is, Nikhil is still in Czechoslovakia. He hasn't come to US as yet. The person who's named, the raw official, supposedly retired, and again they're saying that there is no connection or proof is missing as of now. We still have to see that. But also the larger picture that has come out of it was the way America handled it. They talked to them through back channel. It wasn't done in public. It wasn't there. So they said, okay, we are looking at it. They gave them the papers. There wasn't an announcement of sorts. And if Washington Post came out with it, so far even, the administration hasn't come out and said anything against it. They said we are talking to one another about it. So it is the way they handle it. That's one, versus the way it was handled by Canada. And also there is a lot of anger, which is a second rung of emotion that's happening, is also because a lot of people feel that, Americans go and do the same. I mean, they did that with Osama bin Laden. They've done it with every XYZ. Who are they to tell anybody else to do it if India has gone ahead and done it? Because, these guys are really not, even though the government has maintained that this is not our policy, and it's a fact. It never, there is no official policy where we go after, unlike the Americans, when they say, you're either with us or, against us. So there is these two contradictory things at play here. How do you look at all of this?
Well, I think you raised the right point. I mean, the thing is that this is another point which I think we have to give to India, that essentially the Americans are saying it's terrible. These extrajudicial executions are absolutely terrible thing, except when we do it. Yeah. It's okay if the United States goes and kills Soleimani or bin Laden or whoever. And of course, they make a distinction. You can accept this argument or not as you please. They make a distinction and say, well, it's one thing if you're dealing with a friendly democracy where you can expect that justice will be done and they have a mature and sophisticated legal system and everyone's rights are going to be protected. It's quite another when you've got basically an ungoverned space. The Americans weren't going to get Pakistan to hand over bin Laden, were they? I mean, he was living in Pakistan with Pakistani collusion, so there was no question that there was no alternative from the point of view of the Americans. So there is that argument, but I think that the Indians can certainly win that argument. This is hypocrisy on the part of the West. Say it's okay for you to wipe out your enemies anywhere in the world, but it's not okay for us. And second of all, I think the Indians have much more to say and should say it and will say it. They have been very polite, in my experience, about bringing this matter up to the US and Canada and others and the British over many years to say to them, look, you're not dealing with these people. You're not taking seriously the threat to our country that is being nurtured in Canada and threatening the territorial integrity of India and our sovereignty. If you won't crack down, you can't be surprised that we do.
Yeah.
You know, we're defending ourselves, and you should be helping us instead of just letting it happen. Say, oh well, that's your problem. No, it isn't. It's happening in your country. So I think the Indians could make a stronger argument of that and a louder one because for years they've been very diplomatic. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I was covering this matter of the public display of martyr posters and the like by Khalistanis in Canada for 20 years. During those 20 years, how many times has anyone seen an Indian diplomat or an Indian minister say anything about it publicly? And I would say to you that I would know the answer to that, and I would say on one occasion in 2010, when Manmohan Singh in Toronto on a visit said what should have been said about the fact that terrorism was being plotted in Canada against India. And everyone went, oh, this was a shock. Well, say it again. Maybe it won't be so shocking and you'll do something about it. So I think on that aspect of your question, I think India has more to say and it's legitimate. And nobody should be afraid of it. But what I don't buy is the pretense that somehow the Canadians have no evidence. No. It's one plot, and the American evidence is the Canadian evidence. And at the moment, it has not been specifically denied that somebody who either was or is now in transition out of RNAW, the Research and Analysis Wing, which of course reports to the Indian Prime Minister, that somebody was involved in plotting the killing of Hanoun, at least, and also the killing of Nijjar.
I have to ask you this, that there is this constant voices that keep coming up, and you keep hearing about referendum. 2020 was supposed to be there. You know, you have it in US, you have it in Canada, Australia, UK. These are the usual countries where it is coming up a lot and very often. But of course, the largest population of Sikhs outside India are in Canada. What is it that they want? I mean, I want to understand and ask you about this. Are they looking to create a state in India? Are they saying that they will come back to India after living in Canada? Or what? I mean, what is it that they are looking for?
This is a very good question, and it's not easy to answer. I'll try to give you a short one. They don't know what they want. They want to express their anger at India and Indians for their sense that justice was never done for the massacres of 1984 in the wake of the attack on the Golden Temple, Operation Blue Star. I'm not going to recount all the ancient history. You know it better than I do. But there is a rage, a sense that they were robbed, injustice was done, and the guilty were never punished. 30 years later, there's still a cover-up of the official and police complicity in what used to be called the Delhi riots, but we don't call it that anymore because it was more than Delhi and it was more than riots. It was massacres. It was a pogrom. There's no polite way to put it. Of course, there's a dispute about the numbers. Was it 1,000 killed? Was it 8,000 killed? I can't rule on that. However, there is, at its core, a legitimate beef. And of course, those who disagree with them also have a legitimate, well, you assassinated a democratically elected prime minister. What did you expect? Do you think people wouldn't be mad about that? What planet are you on? And that too is a legitimate answer. And the attack on the Golden Temple is also, the numbers are again wildly exaggerated on one side and minimized on the other side. We're never going to get past that. But if you ask me, Do the Khalistanis really think that this is a feasible process? That this is a plausible goal, an independent state to be torn out of Punjab? And you look at the maps that they put out, including Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, parts of Rajasthan. I mean, and the capital is going to be in Shimla. That's what they say.
Yeah.
What's Shimla is, but we're not claiming any territory in Pakistan. We're not claiming Lahore,
Yeah.
which was
The capital.
only the seat of Ranjit Singh's Sikh Empire back in the day. We're not claiming even Nankana Sahib, the birthplace of the Sikh religion, of Guru Nanak. So it's a very incoherent set of aspirations. And I don't think that you can't really sit down with an intelligent Khalistani and have him explain what exactly. I mean, do you actually believe that this is a plausible scenario? Because it isn't plausible at all. India's not going to allow it. And if they say, for example, well, we should at least be able to have a referendum of people living in Punjab. Well, I'm sorry, but good. I mean, if you get what you want, let's say that Prime Minister Modi and his government said tomorrow, let's have a free vote in Punjab on whether they should separate. Okay. The Pew Research Polling Organization, what was it, 2019, 2020, they interviewed 30,000 Indians. It was a huge, massive survey. And they found that 95%, I'm not kidding, 95% of Sikhs who were interviewed in Punjab said they were very proud to be Indian. And that most of them also said that if you disrespected India, you couldn't be a real Sikh. So that is the state of public opinion in Punjab. Go back and look at the election figures. What was the last time the separatists got 2.5% of the vote and no seats? The election before that, they got 0.3% of the vote and no seats. So don't tell me there is any legit, groundswell of opinion in Punjab. The Sikhs of Punjab have got past all of this long ago. They know what the insurrection, the insurgency by the Khalistanis cost Punjab. It was an economic disaster. They don't want to go back there. So I think you put your finger on the right question to ask. What are they looking for? It's not something they're going to get.
Right. So now I would ask you, the last question is, what is your understanding about the Khalistani movement that is active, alive and kicking in friendly countries who are, forming blocks? There's a Quad, there is IMEC corridors, and all of that is happening. And then you have this, which strategically comes up time and again, and every time it does, somehow one can understand why it is coming up at that particular time, sometimes. And how are you looking at this as a wider picture?
Well, I think that there is the misunderstanding between India and the Western countries that you identify on the nature of free speech and terrorism. Our definitions are not the same. For example, Mr. Panoon, he's a designated terrorist. Now, can you tell me what terrorist acts he carried out? Now, what about Nijjar? He was supposedly with the Khalistan Tiger Force. We have pictures of him toting automatic weapon. What did he actually do? He was named as a suspect in the Ludhiana bombing. I won't get into the details, but so far, you can't really identify, you've designated these people as terrorists, but as Canadians, as Americans, as Australians, as British people, we don't see the evidence that they've actually done any terrorism. Perhaps they fomented it. Perhaps they approved it. But we don't see them actually being terrorists, unlike bin Laden and the rest. So I think that's part of the answer to your question, is that we don't have a common language on that. Right. You call them terrorists, we call them, they're on the edge, maybe, they're activists. And then there's the question of what is freedom of speech and what is okay. I mean, if you advocate a separate state, and that is designated as that's terrorist, then I'm sorry, we don't agree. and we're not going to agree. That isn't so. Every time something comes up, somebody says something provocative. Panoon puts out a video, for example, as he did a few months back, saying that don't fly on Air India because it'll be risking your life. Oh, all I'm saying is I'm just saying calling for a boycott. He says, well, why would a boycott risk your life? Well, it sounds to me like that's a threat of something more than a boycott.
Yes.
That pops up, and then there's a debate about that and what should we do, and we end up doing nothing. Yep. But I'm hoping, personally, that in the wake of these very important developments at the highest level, where basically the United States is alleging that a valued geostrategic partner, a giant on the world stage, a bulwark against the rise of China, and an important ally, has engaged in trying to kill an American citizen on American soil. I think that this is going to move the debate forward and force people to confront the issues that you're asking me about and we're discussing today, and draw some new lines and firmer lines. But the Indians are entitled to say, okay, you want to see justice done in this latest case. You want to see heads roll. You want to see punishment and trials of the people who engaged in this outrage against American sovereignty. But in return, we, the Indians, want to see action on your side to bring down the temperature, disallow the public display advocating that mass murderers like Parmar and many others, assassins, the assassins of Indira Gandhi, the assassins of General Vaidya, the assassins of Bayant Singh in Punjab, the Chief Minister of Punjab in 1995, all of these things, we're going to draw a line and say, if you want to do that in public, we're not coming to your. I'm not saying lock them up. We don't have a law.
Yeah.
But I'm saying discourage it at the very least by refusing to show up for their parades.
Yes.
It's not acceptable. If they won't even say that it's not acceptable and they won't participate in it, they won't have the Prime Minister going up at a rally, as he did 2 days ago in Toronto, where people are shouting, Khalistan Zindabad. I mean, that's embarrassing and it's wrong. And if Canada and the United States don't do something to crack down on that, I think Indians will have a legitimate complaint. So, well, you want us to act for your interests in holding these people to account in the Panoon murder plot. Here's what you have to do and say. If you won't do your part, we won't do ours. That is an important negotiation to have. And I hope and expect that it's going to be underway now, and if not, very soon.
So my final question, and I'm requesting for a short answer as we're running out of time. Where do you see all this going? Because NDP is getting stronger. Jagmeet, I was reading about them saying that they should fight independently. Do you see somewhere down the line, becoming a big force in Canada? And probably for Canberra more so.
I think that the Khalistan movement in Canada has peaked. I think people are tired of it, and that the younger generation has other priorities, that the older generation has bored everybody to death. I think the Canadians, I mean, unless there's a big development, the Prime Minister gets up and accuses India of murder, the Canadians no longer pay very much attention to this file. They've heard about it for 20 years. They're parading through the streets with Khalistan flags. What's on the other channel is the reaction of most Canadians. And that is significant because they're just not catching fire anymore. At the same time, the hardcore doesn't like this development, of course, and is fighting to prevent it by being as provocative as they can, by stepping up the level of provocation in order to bring in new recruits. I don't think they're going to succeed. I think the world has moved on, but I think it will end with a bang, not a whimper. I think that we're going to find that the hardcore Khalistanis are going to get desperate to try to keep it alive, and that they're going to make more trouble before they're done. But I'm hoping, as I say, that the Western democracies, my country, the United States, will all take a hard look at what they've been tolerating up until now, and we'll do something about it. I'm not saying lock them up, ban them all, because I don't think that would fit within the democratic laws that we're used to. But I am saying discourage it at the very least. Show by your actions that you are not prepared to kowtow and pander to people advocating violence in order to get yourself elected. Now, if that is a definition that I could live with it. If politicians adopted that posture, then I think that the future is going to be a lot better on this front.
I think we can live in hope and hope that this is what happens and this is how it plays out. But it's scary to hear you say that it can get a little, they might ratchet up a bit before they come down. But like I said, we all live in hope. Thank you so much for talking to us, Mr. Miliskate. I'll come back.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
There is hopefully in a better position to talk to you on other things other than the Khalistan issue. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.